King's Washington Area Alumni Club's Career Day program. My name is John Wetterow, and I'm a member of the King's College class of 1970. I'll be your host for this session tonight, and I'm also a proud member of the King's College Washington Area Alumni Club's Executive Committee, known as KWAC, KWAC, pretty much what everybody calls us. I'm happy to welcome each of you here. We got students, we have presenters, we have alumni, friends, and also the King staff to our second virtual KWAC Career Day program. KWAC Career Day is traditionally hosted here in Washington, D.C. by the KWAC Executive Committee. For many years, this exciting program has provided a wide range of professional opportunities to King students, thanks to the generosity of many King's D.C. area alumni and friends, many of whom are presenting and or observing in these sessions this year. If you haven't already, please be sure to mute yourself while our presenters are speaking. There will be time for questions and answers at the end, so save your questions for that time. And when you do have a question, feel free to unmute and ask it. Or in the meantime, you can always put your question into the chat feature of the presentation. We've got 6 terrific sessions scheduled for this year's Career Day. This is the second session. We had one at 5 o'clock, and now we have this tonight. And this session is called Resume and Interview Tips. Very important topic. And I'd like to introduce our moderator for the session. Actually, we have 2 moderators. Jordan Prey, who's a graduate of the class of 2018 from King's, and Katie Jonas, both of which are from HeiTech Services. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Katie and Jordan.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to attend this presentation. We've been doing this for quite a few years now. I don't know how long off the top of my head, but it's been several. And so we love doing it for you every year. We'll talk about resumes and interview tips and just kind of give you some things to think about as you start your journey in your careers. I'm Director of Human Resources at HeiTech Services. And then Jordan, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Absolutely. I am Jordan. I am the Employee Relations Specialist at HeiTech Services. I've been there for a little over 3 years now. And I've been doing this for all 3 of those years that I have been there. So we're excited to give you some general information, and we'll have plenty of time for all of your questions at the end. So please make sure you write them down or put them in the chat. Like John said before, we're happy to answer them at the end.
All right, so we're going to first talk about the resume and some things to think about with when you're putting together your resume. The average number of resumes that a position may receive is about 250, which is obviously a lot, right? The average time spent looking at a resume is 5 to 7 seconds, okay? What's the one mistake that gets your resume thrown in the trash? Spelling errors, right? Make sure you proofread and spell check your document, and we'll talk about that. We'll first talk about some resume don'ts, okay? Some things to think about when you're putting together your resume that you want to avoid. So this is an example. Because you all are in college, you don't need to list your high school anymore. Your college education is fine on there. Also, make sure that you proofread. Okay, we just talked about spelling errors. Obviously, when it's King's Collage, that's not going to come up in a spell check because it's an actual word. So you want to make sure that you proofread as well. Make sure you get other people to look at your resume for you. Okay, send it around to people, have people proofread it, and make sure that things like that are caught. Usually people want to know the locations of your past jobs, so don't leave that out. Just the city and the state is fine. And then you don't use personal pronouns, I, me, or my. And we'll talk about what you should use instead coming up in the upcoming slides. Don't misstate or lie on your resume. Obviously not a good idea. This resume example, somebody put that they're the CEO of Panera Bread. And then obviously the description there does not match probably what a CEO at Panera would do. Always be truthful, especially obviously when you're in an interview and these things come up and they talk about your resume, you need to make sure that you can answer those questions, right? Don't list references on your resume. You can list something like references available upon request, and then have a list of references that you have ready to go, okay? Also make sure you talk to your references to let them know that you've put them as a reference, right? Don't list hobbies or other irrelevant information. You know, like this example, I like to play paintball and plant flowers, okay? Probably not relevant to the
quarter of I want on this whole thing.
probably not relevant to the job that you're applying for, okay? Also, don't mix verb phrases, past versus present tense. So if it's your current job, stay in present tense. If it's a past job, you can use past tense. And then strive for consistency and use action verbs, which we'll talk about. This is an example of what to do on your resume. I just want to point out the layout of it. I know that when resumes come in to Jordan and I, if I can't easily see everything, education, job, bullet points, I really don't even want to read it sometimes. But to be honest, right? So I like to quickly glance at it. I said it's an average person looks at it for 5 to 7 seconds, right? So you want to make sure that you have it nicely laid out, okay? Use bulleted style to make it reader friendly. You want to lead with jobs if you have experience. Right now, since you're still in college, you probably have very little to no experience. You want to lead with your education first, and then your jobs, and then you'll list your jobs in reverse chronological order. So you'll start with your most recent positions first, and then go from there. One of the big things that we talk about is action verbs. Okay, instead of saying I washed dishes, or I did this, or I did this, you know, you want to say created, designed, prepared, established. Words that show action rather than I just did this, I did that, I did that. So something to think about. You want to make sure that you have some sort of profile, objective, something like that. In this section, you can emphasize transferable skills, okay? Since many of you probably don't have a lot of work experience, doesn't mean that you don't have transferable skills. Transferable skills are things that you can take from any job or experience and apply to another job. Detail-oriented, organizational skills, things like that. Interpersonal skills, okay? Okay. A big thing we talk about is think of it terms in accomplishments instead of job duties. Okay, think about specific things that you did to make a difference, okay, in those positions. So one of the things I think you guys do a lot is case studies. There's like, Jordan probably can help me out with this. There's a lot of relevant things you guys do there, like competitions, I believe, that are great on the resume, and you can highlight those transferable skills and those accomplishments in those different competitions that you do, okay? Also, like the other example there about the landscaping thing. So I think this was, you know, somebody could have said that I mowed the grass for my neighbor, right? But instead he talked about the other things that they did, manage business operations by budgeting, things like that, really made that position stand out, made it relevant to maybe the job that he or she was applying for. Quantify whenever possible. Okay, if you have numbers, statistics, that's going to make your resume stand out. Things that you can talk about in an interview. One of my things I think is most important is that you want things on your resume that you want to talk about in an interview. I've looked at, we used to, when we did King's College in the past, we used to get the resumes and review them ahead of time and give feedback on them. And a lot of the times the things that we saw were like, when I asked further about what was on their resume, they didn't really have anything to say. They didn't really want to talk about it, right? So make sure that you have things on your resume that you want to talk about, that you can explain. This person showed us exactly how much money they raised by preparing a charity walk event. So things to think about like that. Like I said, don't misstate or lie, but make it exciting, right? Show those accomplishments and what you did. Keep your resume to 1 or no more than 2 pages. Remember, it's quality versus quantity. A lot of times I'll see a bunch of volunteer experience, a bunch of hobbies, things like that. If it's relevant to the job, I think it's okay, but don't just put extra things on there to fill up 2 pages, right? Put the relevant information on there. Proofread carefully. We've talked a lot about that, and then getting feedback on your resume once you have a draft copy. Another tip would be tailoring your resume for the position you're applying for. Okay, so when you see a job description, you know what they're looking for. So make sure you have those pieces in your resume. I think a lot of times they'll do where you submit your resume has automatic keywords that it finds, right? So it's like a database where it finds keywords in your resume that they're looking for. So you want to think about that too when you're applying for positions and putting together your resume. Jordan, anything to add?
No.
And keep in mind that not everyone's going to like the same thing, right? Maybe some people like a 6-page resume with everything you've ever done in your life. You know, I'm more of a, I want to see the highlights, bullet points, make it concise. So those are our tips for your resume, and we'll answer questions. I know there's a few questions about resumes and other things in there that we can get to at the end as well. Jordan, are you taking this one?
No, if you want to take it, and I'll take
Oh,
the
okay.
next thing.
Okay, I'll take this one too.
Yeah.
Safeguarding your professional image. Recruiters are using social media sites, so Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm sure there's more that I don't even know about because now I'm getting old. So, but the good news is that they give you exposure, right? The bad news is they give you exposure, right? And so make sure you don't post anything on there that you don't want shared in this presentation, right? So actually, we found some of your guys' TikToks, and we're going to share them now. I'm just kidding. If you cringed at that, though, make sure that you're not putting anything on there that's inappropriate, okay? And that you want to make sure that you keep a professional image.
All right,
All
now
right,
we'll take over.
All right.
Okay, so we'll get started on the interview. We'll cover all the different types. So just a reminder, there are multiple different types of interviews. And when you go through the process, every company is going to be very different. So you may have an interview process that starts with a phone screen and then goes to a personal in-person interview with one person. And then you may have a virtual interview with a larger team that's maybe located at a different site. So it can be varied depending on where you're going, what kind of jobs you're interviewing for, on the different types. So everything we're going to go over is going to apply to every interview that you could possibly go in, whether it be the phone interview, an in-person, a virtual, or even a recorded interview. So to start out, you have to prepare for your interview. You want to make sure that you are researching your organization that you are applying for. So my high advice would be going out and searching for jobs, saving those jobs, and then start the research as you're applying for them, so that as they come through and you get approvals or a phone screening, that you are ready for those and prepped as you're applying for them. Make sure that you take a look at their website. Make sure you take a look at their social media, find out what's going on in the company, especially if you're applying for a huge company, someplace like PepsiCo or Deloitte, a huge government contractor. They're going to have a ton of information on their social media, on their website, where they're going to show current events, things they're talking about, whether it be on LinkedIn or Twitter or Fishbowl or any of those sites. You're going to want to look at those, see what kind of information they value. See those current events that could come up during the interview process. Once you feel like you're prepped enough and you have that information gathered about the organization and maybe even the specific people that are going to be interviewing you, you want to make sure that you're assessing all of your skills. Take a look at that resume that you just tailored to this position and review it. Go through all of the information you put on that resume and start trying to figure out how you would answer questions that came up in regards to those situations, in regards to those statistics that you put on your resume and that $1,500 that you raised. How would you answer a question when it came up? And make sure that you're answering it in the STAR method. It's a big thing, especially if you're going into anything government related, that you are answering those questions in that STAR method. It's important to bring up the situation first, go through the task, and then the action of how you completed that task. And then the final result, what did you do in order to complete it after that action? And what was the outcome? Did you get it done on time? Did you accomplish everything that you were supposed to? Was there any sort of delays? And how did you fix them? So make sure that you're covering all of your bases, but don't overdo it either. So make sure you're kind of simplifying it down, getting to the point and answering all of those questions. And finally, for the interview, you want to brainstorm and do your final prep. Make sure that you come up with about 8 to 10 questions. If the interview asks this, how would I respond? And is there a question that could develop that I could ask because of this? And try to have those 8 to 10. I promise you, you don't need to ask those 8 to 10, but as you go through the interview, you're going to start checking some of them off because they're going to get answered. And then you might only have about 3 at the end that are left. So you want to make sure you have enough prepped at the beginning. So when you get to the end of the interview, you have a couple questions that you're going to be asking that interviewer, that you show that you're interested, that you're listening. Maybe even something comes up during the interview that now you can ask a question about, and you're going to add it to your list. So during the interview, your interview starts the moment that you walk in the door, the moment that you open up that virtual invite and go into your presentation. So be aware of everything that's going on around you. Be aware of how you're treating the staff when you go on site, whether you're showing up 5 minutes early for your virtual interview or 10 minutes early for your in-person. Make sure that you're not showing up way too early. One of the things that I highly recommend, especially for something that's super far away, is do your research ahead of time. Make sure you're looking at traffic. Make sure that you are looking to see, hey, if this interview is over an hour away because I'm looking to relocate, maybe I should go 40 minutes early in case there's some traffic and see if there's a cafe or something nearby that you could hang out until you can go up to your interview. Highly recommend that. For virtual, make sure there's no distractions around you. Make sure you have a clean background or that you can blur out any mess that is behind you maybe, or come up with a virtual background that you can set up in case you don't have a plain background anywhere. Make sure you have good lighting, that they can see you in the interview and that they can read all of your posture and see everything that's going on so that they can't sit there and you're blacked out the whole time because your lighting is bad. Make sure that you want to maintain your breathing, keep yourself calm as you're prepping for it, especially for in-person. Highly recommend to stay off your phone. If you're sitting in a lobby, don't be sitting there typing up on your phone, distracted. Take that time to look over your resume and prep yourself for going into the room with your interviewer. During the actual interview itself, make sure you're listening carefully to everything, especially at the very beginning. A lot of times the interviewer will actually go through some of the position before they start asking questions. That's your time to kind of take that in and see if there's anything you should focus on. Maybe they mentioned teamwork. So now you should focus on teamwork for a couple questions. Maybe they'll mention data stuff and you want to try to focus on some data and statistics that you have and try to narrow down some of the things that you might need.
Yeah, that's all. I just had the wrong meeting.
Make sure that as you're listening and they're asking those questions and you're bringing those up then after you go through the position, that if you have anything that comes up, you ask for that clarification. Make sure that if you don't really fully understand the question, maybe answer part of it, restate, and get that clarification before you move on to something else. And then thoroughly answer the questions. Like I said before, you want to go through your whole STAR method, but you don't want to overdo it. We don't want to sit there and listen to your 3-minute explanation of this huge question when we really just needed a short, concise answer, and it not to take up the entire interview, because we do have a huge list of questions as well. Make sure that you're focusing on the questions that you're being asked. Again, paying attention, making sure you're focusing on how can you help them? How are you advertising yourself to this company? And make sure that you are presenting yourself in a way that is making you an advantage to this company, something that you can do for them, and focus on that instead of the I. At the end, you want to make sure that you are thanking the interviewer for their time and expressing any interest that you have in the position. And then, of course, asking those questions before you close everything out, and make sure that you are prepped for that. We do call it a huge red flag when we get through the whole interview and that person doesn't have any questions. It's absolutely shocking, and it's really hard to move that person forward when they really made it through that whole thing and I didn't screw up. They don't have any questions. They didn't prep for this. So there's all those shocking things that go through your mind when someone comes to you and doesn't have any questions. So make sure you have something. Even if you narrowed it all down and you really only have one, make sure you're asking that one question. Katie, anything to add during the interview?
No, I would just say that to your point, if they don't have any questions, sometimes it feels like they're uninterested in the position, you know? So I do agree with that.
All right, and just some extras on the virtual interviewing. Like I said before, make sure you're treating it as an in-person. Make sure you're dressing for it. It's super important to dress for your interview. So make sure that you are fully dressed in your interview wear, okay? No one needs you getting up to grab a drink of water and wearing sweatpants, even though you're wearing a blazer on the top. Make sure you're fully dressed. It also helps with the way that you're presenting yourself. So dressing for the part that you are going to be playing in this company is going to help present that into the interview. So if you're only dressed in sweatpants, you're going to kind of give that air and that volume coming through in your interview, instead of if you're wearing a blazer and your pants and you're ready to go and you're prepared and you have that confidence that comes with it. Test your tech. Make sure that if there's a certain program you're going to be using, maybe it's Google Meets and you've never used it before, see if you can Google Meet with a friend and try it out on your computer or your phone or whatever you're going to be using as your setup for the interview. And then set the scene. Like I said before, make sure you don't have those distractions. Make sure you have a clean background, and try to make sure you're in a quiet environment. And don't panic. So technology has issues, okay? It's okay if your internet drops. Do your best to get back in. Make sure you have their email up and ready to go just in case something does go wrong. And you can email them really quickly, say, I'm so sorry, I am trying to get back into the interview. My internet has dropped off, and so there's some sort of disconnect in the video, and then keep attempting to get back on. You will get back on. I promise you they will be waiting there for you. It happens with us as well on our side where it has just dropped off in the middle of an interview. So it does happen, and it is okay. And then here I just have a list of some commonly asked questions. I know some of you had some questions on this, on things that people ask in an interview. The internet is absolutely your friend when it comes to this. I don't recommend it for everything, but for this I do. There are just lists and lists and lists of questions out there that you can find and search, just commonly asked interview questions. Indeed has a whole list for you and how to answer some of them as well. Tell me a little bit about yourself. That is a huge question to ask someone. It's a horrible question. How do you answer that? What do you focus on? What do you start with? So trying to figure out a summary of just some quick things that you can tidbit on, maybe something that you caught when they gave that introduction about the position, about the company when you first walked in the door, and maybe try to focus on something like that when you talk about yourself. They talked about teamwork. Start with your basics and then focus and try to wind it around teamwork. So trying to use that info that you brought in as you went in the door. What made you interested in the company, interested in the position? That all has to do with those prep, that values, the information, maybe something you saw on social media that you want to bring up at that time. Your greatest strengths, your greatest weaknesses, great points, but finding ways to turn that weakness into a strength. Focus on the weakness, but then turn it around and say, yes, I am extremely organized in its OCD organization, and I believe that's a weakness because I spend all of my time trying to organize and get this done. But it means that I'm always ready to go and I'm always organized and everything, and I know how to prioritize because of this organization. So finding ways to kind of turn that around as much as possible. So here's just like a little summary of that. Like I said, the internet's your friend when it comes to these questions. Finding them on Indeed, finding them on SHRM's website, all of that is public info and ready for you to see that. We can answer more questions on that in a moment. But we do have that after the interview. So after your interview is over, make sure you send some sort of follow-up. When it's a recorded interview, it's a little bit harder. A lot of times with those pre-recorded interviews where you answer all of those questions and then it closes out for you, you can't follow up with anyone, which is okay. It's not your fault. If you do have some sort of contact, please feel free to reach out to them. Let them know my interview has been sent in. I just wanted to ensure that everything is good on that end. Is there anything else I need to do at this time? Follow up with the person that interviewed you, thank them for their time, maybe mention something, a point of interest that you discussed, keep it short and to the point, and then maybe put in a sentence about considering you for the opportunity and let them know that you are still interested. And then continue your search. You're not going to find your job immediately. You're not going to find that perfect fit necessarily right away. If you do, congratulations, because you are one of the lucky ones. But it's okay if you don't. You're going to make some pitfalls. You're going to have some bad interviews. You're going to have some bad interviewers. Or you're sitting in the interview and you're wondering why they're asking these questions. And that's okay. And it's going to have that in your experience. And one of the points that we like to make is success is not a straight line. It's not perfect. You are not going to get to the top immediately. You're going to have some pitfalls. You're going to have some issues, but that is where you're going to learn. That's where you're going to develop. That first job may not be exactly what you want, but it's going to be a huge learning experience for you. And you're going to learn something out of it that's going to get you to where you want to go. So that is absolutely everything we have in this presentation for today for the interviewing and resume tips. I know we do have a list of questions that were sent in, but before we go through some of those, I figured I would just check them off if they get answered. But otherwise, we can open the floor up to any questions in the chat or in general. I'm here.
I have a question, actually.
Absolutely.
What, like, in terms of, there was one of the slides was like the steps in the interview or something like that. Like, what do you think is the most common, like, thing that people miss, like, during the interview? Like, what they forget to do, like, one, like, tip that we discussed?
So I would say that one of the most commonly missed items would be the fact that a lot of times you'll ask a person a question and they'll miss part of it. So it's almost like they're not fully listening to the entirety of the question, which happens when people get nervous and they'll kind of skip over part of it instead of answering the full question, and then you have to re-ask it. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a skill that is missed or a specific thing that is missed, so much as just something to focus on and make sure that you're listening fully to the question being asked as much as possible. And then sitting just for a second, like I just did when you asked that, sitting just a second to kind of contemplate it and then answer the question, to just kind of evaluate it in your head and then answer it, to try to make sure that you have that full answer prepped, ready to go in your head before you come out and answer it and then miss half of it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And a good interviewer will ask like a behavioral question, like, tell me about a time when yada, yada, yada. And then when you answer it, then what normally should happen is they kind of dig deeper. Well, why did that happen? Tell me about this. Tell me about this. And so having that all prepared as well is helpful. And sometimes they'll lead that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I don't believe I can see the chat, so I'm not sure if there are questions coming in there. I don't see any right now.
Not
Yeah,
seeing in
so-
the chat. If anyone has a question and wants to unmute like Sean, if not, I can go through some of those questions that were submitted at registration.
I have a question as well.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Absolutely.
So I'm in mass communications, and I have some strengths in graphic design and photography. So when it comes to having a creative resume, should I, stick to the bare minimum with no creative aspects of it, with just my, accomplishments and everything and my education, or should I add some creativity into it, or should I have two resumes?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I would recommend having more than one resume. Absolutely. You're tailoring your resume to the job. So
Right.
if you're applying for something that's more towards the marketing end of design, then you might want to have a more structured resume. If you're leaning more towards the graphic design side, then maybe you want to do a small spin on your resume. Always make sure that it is still clearly stated. It's still the important, most pertinent information that you want bullet pointed on there. So
Right.
you want to focus on that. Something like having your own like insignia on your resume, where you have your own kind of like little watermark in the top hand corner that maybe you created.
Right.
That would be a great talking point. Having a portfolio, maybe even of some of those graphic designs and things, which I'm sure you do have, and saying on your resume, just like we said before about the reference section, and saying I have references upon request, saying your portfolio is upon request and ready to go. Putting that on there is always great. That would be one of those kind of extras that you wouldn't necessarily think you should put on your resume. Having
Right.
that portfolio ready, having even if you're into kind of the internet graphic design, if you have your own website that is work appropriate, you're more than welcome to put that on there as like a link saying, please feel free to visit my graphic design website with all of your information on there.
Right. Thank you.
Emise Martin has used the raise the hand feature. So Emise, if you're
Okay.
ready.
Yes. I just wanted to ask. I recently had a interview, right, like a month ago, and I had my second interview. It will be like a Zoom interview. I just want to ask, what should I be expecting on the second interview? They call me back for a second interview, so I'm guessing they're a little bit interesting on, the interview process. So I want to know, like, what should I expect on this next interview, the second one.
Katie, you want to take this one?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear the question.
Yeah,
Was
so
it
I
about
can
a
it's okay,
second interview?
I can reword it. She just asked if there's anything different she can expect for a second interview after she went through her first one. There was about, I think you said about a month break, and then they reached out regarding the second interview, and she wants to know if there's anything different that she should expect or be ready for in the second interview.
I think I'm assuming it'll probably be pretty similar to the first interview. Do you know who you're interviewing with? I guess I assume it's a second level manager maybe that you're interviewing with. So I would keep that in mind. They may ask some different questions. But I think it'll be pretty similar to the first interview. And then it also probably gives you an opportunity to ask some additional questions as well, as you've already sat through the first interview. So I would prepare other questions for this interviewer as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, looks like we have one come in the chat.
Yep.
It says, how would you strike the balance of making your resume and interview true to yourself, but also keeping it as professional as possible? Is there a specific question regarding it with being true to yourself that you're concerned regarding that you would like to add in there? I would think that specifically the resume is mostly to get you in front of a supervisor. So it's going to focus really on those statistics, that structure. If you're in a creative field, if you're in something like graphic design, like we just had a question asked about, sticking true to yourself would be adding that little pop of something into your resume, which is okay in those fields. Otherwise, it's kind of more on that structured side. Staying true to yourself would mostly just be making sure that you're honest, following all of those guidelines that we went over, making sure that you are going through all of the correct information so that you can answer those questions about yourself. And the interview is really where you're going to be able to shine and show your personality.
Okay, that kind of makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. So I was just kind of thinking about just kind of staying true to yourself, like don't forget kind of who you are while you are going through the interview process. Like you obviously want to, you want to present yourself in a great way, but like not have it be like not authentic, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you.
Well, no, absolutely. I would say that is the interview in and of itself. That's your time to show your personality, show what you're going to bring to the table, show them who you are as a person, because they're going to be working with you. So you want to make sure you're not hiding all of that information from them. Obviously, don't overdo it, because if you're really interested in it and you're building a good relationship with those people and you're really excited about it, you want to make sure that you're also presenting yourself in a way that's going to show them that interest, but not completely blow them out of the water so that they're now terrified.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I also think, I know there was a question asked earlier, the list of questions that we got about how do you know if the company's a good fit for you, right? And I think that kind of goes along with that. Like if it doesn't feel right, if you leave that interview and think, even if they offer you a job, but if it doesn't feel right to you, I mean, you can take the job, or you can just keep looking. Like I think you'll have a good sense after the interview of what the culture is like and if it's a good fit for you. Okay? And if not, you can ask those questions. Some ideas of questions that you can ask in an interview. I know Jordan and I had talked about this before. What's the company culture like? Why? Somebody asked us in an interview once, why do you like working here? I thought that was a great question to ask, right? It made us think a little bit about answering the question about, and it was an honest answer of why we liked working there. Some other questions to ask is, if you're interviewing with the manager that you'd be working with, what's your management style, right? Getting that information. And then, what would your team look like? So are you working with a team? Are you working with 2 other people, 5 other people? What does that look like? So.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Beth, you want to go over some of those questions we got in advance?
Sure. I think well, I don't know if we covered this or not, but someone asked about best tips to get the interviewer's attention. And I think that's kind of like in reference to, today's world where there is Indeed.com and the recruiter at an office might get all those resumes. And how do you really get your resume from being on the yes pile from the no pile to the pile that's at least going to get a call or something like that?
I mean, I think one of the things is just having a visually appealing resume. Like I had stated earlier, just making it obvious of the positions you've had. People don't want to have to search your resume for everything, right? So making it visually appealing, I think, is super helpful. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to get a resume to stand out, right? So, but hopefully you get through that first step and then you get the interview and can really make yourself stand out. It's much easier that way, I think, once you get there.
I think,
Jordan.
Yeah, I think to build on that would be those statistics are great. That's what the data is going to catch that when it goes through those systems, those ATS systems that companies use. It's going to pull out those keywords that you're going to have in that resume. So as you're applying for jobs, if you're applying for something in maybe the finance field, look at jobs in the finance field, see what kind of wording they're using in their job descriptions and try to put some of that into your resume. So instead of saying, interview, you're going to say development, or you're going to say, instead of negotiate, maybe you're going to use a different word because that's what they're using in their job descriptions. And that's what's going to pull out when it goes through those ATS systems and how you're going to bring your resume to the front of those lists. So large companies use those giant programs that are going to pull out resumes and they go to the top of their lists for them. Whereas smaller companies, they're going to actually look at those resumes. So you still want to have that same information, those same keywords on there. They're going to bring you to the top of the list.
Hey, Katie and Jordan, what about visual changes? Somebody putting using paper with a border on it, somebody using a different colored paper, like a blue or a pink, something that would stand out. At least you get that second look at it. But is there anything in the visual areas that could be positive?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So we're not against it, I would say. Definitely not. I think it's still important to make sure that no matter what you're doing, that you are making sure that it's readable. So if you want to do a border, make sure it's smaller, because the most important thing is putting your information onto your resume. And that's what we're going to focus on when we do it does catch our eye. You want to still make sure you still have the same info. And you don't want it to be too much. So I don't know that I would necessarily recommend having too much color in there and using a different colored paper unless it's something super simple. I wouldn't do something dark with a light print. I would keep it simple and to the point, but you could do a pop of color that maybe catch their attention. Maybe, like I said before, if you're in graphic design and you have your own little insignia or something you put in the top corner, that might catch my eye and I'll bring you to the top of the list and put you on the top of my pile before I start going through in more detail. So definitely, I think that we're not against it. We're not entirely for it either. So make sure you kind of have a decent balance going on as you're looking into it.
Jordan and Katie, are cover letters still part of the process?
If they are requested.
If they're
I would say if you have, it is recommended as you apply for jobs to have some sort of generic cover letter ready. That way, if they ask for it, you can give them something. Some jobs that you apply for now are still asking for them. Not very many, to be completely honest. A lot of times we don't read them. It's a lot of info and we would rather talk to you in person. But if it comes down to it and we're deciding between a couple people, we're absolutely going to look at a cover letter if you sent it in. So if you are going to send it in, even if it's an option, make sure that it is really well done. Because if it gets to that point, that's what we're going to use as the deciding factor.
I have a question building off of that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see a job listing and it just says resume, so that means no cover letter. So if it doesn't necessarily say cover letter, they don't want one.
That is correct. At that time, they do not want a cover letter. There are many positions that will only ask for a resume. And then once you make it to another step, they may request other things.
Mm-hmm.
They may request that you do a little project for them. They may request that you do a cover letter and send something in, or they may just ask for things like references and referrals.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes when you get further along, writing samples or things like that might be important, but good point that if they don't ask for it, don't worry about it.
Yes, don't worry about it. Don't stress over it. It's one less thing you have to worry about in your process.
Any questions live? Because I have one or two more to read.
I believe we have one in the chat.
Oh, okay. Go for it. Let's see. This is from Melvin. As an accounting student, I truly want to find the firm that works best in terms of values and the work environment. However, in my opinion, the wage definitely sways my mind a bit. From your own experience, would you say that wage is a significant factor when deciding to work somewhere?
Oh, that is a wonderful question. It's hard to say no to a high wage. However, it's really important to be happy with where you're working. Because you do not want to be miserable and paid more money, because I promise you won't stay long. It is not fun to be working in an environment where you're not happy with the values or the people you're working with. But it's also important to make sure that you're not living month to month and struggling. So it is definitely a balance. Do your research. Make sure that wherever you are moving to or relocating, that you understand how much it costs to live there, how much it costs to have a car or public transportation, to rent your apartment or to live at home. So make sure that you're doing all that research, figure out what your bottom line is, and then go from there and see if you can find a company in your bottom line, or maybe you'll get something higher. So make sure that you're giving them a range as well. So if you're getting an offer on the table and they're asking for your range, make sure you know that bottom line, and then give them a range. Say, you know, I would be interested in accepting a job that was between 40,000 and 50,000. So give them that $10,000 range, and you can always hope that your experience is going to encourage them to put you on that higher end. And that's okay to give them that larger range. I wouldn't go more than 10,000 as a range when you're negotiating a position, but make sure that you give them something up front.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And as you progress in your careers, you'll figure this out. You know, you'll figure out what's important, what if your life changes, your lifestyle changes, what you want. And so I also think about, you know, what's going to help your resume as well. Also, is there opportunity to grow in the company? I started out at HeiTech Services filing paperwork, literally filing paperwork, right? And I'm the director of HR. Like, I didn't really see that one coming, but here we are, right? So I had an opportunity to grow and learn in many different positions to get where I am. So that's pretty cool. So you never know. But I really do think that work environment and values is super important, but you need to be able to pay your student loans, your monthly bills, things like that, right? So it is a balancing act.
And I'll just chime in with Melvin. So I know Melvin quite well. So thank you, Melvin, for a great answer. But also, if you have questions specifically, come and see me. I'm happy to talk with you about those different opportunities. But just so you know, they're all very similar. So all of the firms that we typically would work with, or all of the big four firms, are typically right in that range with each other, right? So there's not going to be much difference between what they're giving. So like Katie and Jordan said, make sure you connect with their values, with their mission, with what they do, that you like the job, because if you like it, you're going to stay longer and you're going to move up faster and better and to more, to higher paying positions as well. So a lot of similarity within those firms, but I'm happy to have that conversation privately with you as well. So just want to throw that in there, but thank you both for such great answers.
Absolutely.
And to go off of that, Teresa, King's College has a great resource. It has great people to help you guys. I never had that in college, and it's amazing. So work with them. I know you guys help people all the time, and it's amazing the opportunities that the students at King's have.
Well, thanks, Katie. We try real hard.
I have one more question for you guys. So in the hiring process, which would you say weighs more, the contents of the resume or the productivity of the interview?
So I definitely think the resume only gets you in the door.
Right.
That is what it's for. And after that, we don't really look at it again. So I would definitely say that the interview is yours to take and run with it. And if you don't interview well, you're not going anywhere. So you want to make sure you are practicing those interview skills. Again, we're going back to Teresa. That career development department is for you guys. They will help you with everything. They will help you practice everything. There are classes that I took at King's that walked you through all of this. I don't know if they're still required or not. It's been a while. But I know when I was there, it was required. Are they required, Teresa?
They are still required in the business school. So
Okay.
I actually remember Jordan as a student. So don't right. So I'd like to say I taught her everything she knows, but that's not really true.
You taught me a lot, Teresa. You taught me a lot.
Well, you're a great student, Jordan. So it was a pleasure always. But I'm not sure. I couldn't see in my box who asked that question. But yeah, that was the perfect answer, right? That resume gets you in the door.
Mhm.
Then you start over, right? It's a
Yeah.
whole new ball game once you get in the door, and then so they're both super important. The resume has got to get you in the door, and then once you get in the door, you've got to prove yourself with those interviewing skills.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Practice, practice, practice.
yeah.
I know it seems odd that practicing the interview is so important, but it is. Having those questions asked to you by random strangers, making sure that you have those answers ready to go, because they will come up. Even
Right.
though you are coming up with your own questions, I promise you at least one of the ones on your list will come up during the interview, and you'll be ready for it. And that is what's gonna help you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Welcome.
Probably have time for maybe one more question. Beth, you got any other ones?
There was one I wanted to talk about. It was about work hours.
Yes.
That one.
How to negotiate availability in hours. Is that it?
Yep, I think that was it.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple points on that because a lot of times job descriptions now will tell you if it's remote position or hybrid or something along those lines. So that's something to look out if that's important to you. Generally, that is on the job description. It depends on the type of job that you have or are interviewing for. I would ask what the work hours are. And if they say it's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, that's it. Then don't say, oh, well, can I negotiate? Is there room for flexibility? I think once you get into the position, you'll know. You also, if you need it to be flexible and they're saying it's not flexible, then maybe that's not the position for you, right? But a lot of times positions are flexible, especially professional positions. So, but I wouldn't try to negotiate that right away. But if it is important to you, it is a question that you can ask. What are the work hours? And a lot of times they'll tell you it's flexible. It's 8 to 5, an hour before, hour after, anytime in between there. So that would be my 2 cents for that question. Jordan, do you have anything else to add?
No.
Yeah, with more and more people working remote, that's probably a really interesting subject coming up in interviews now is how much is flexible, because so many people, if they're working from home, their hours are shifting, right? They could be working, but it also depends on the culture of the company, and the interview is the time to find that out.
Yep. And a lot of times there's some people that don't like working from home. They want to be in an office.
That's exactly what I was just going to say, because there's a lot. I talked to a student a couple of days ago, and they said, deciding between 2 different offers, one was fully remote, one was not. And based upon what they like, based upon their personality and the culture that they're looking for, they didn't want the fully remote option. But there's other people who absolutely, it was like, that's going to be perfect for me. I don't have to drive. I, have a dog or whatever it might be. So again, it's all like going back to what works for you. And again, like Jordan and Katie said, the culture, the organization, and, you have to weigh all those things when you're deciding about an offer. So.
They're tough decisions to make.
Yeah, right. And if you go back to Melvin's point, right, if you're thinking about the wage, you might have, 2 different options. One might give you some hybrid options but be a lower salary, where one is making you come to the office every day and it's a higher salary, but it costs you X amount to get to the office every day. So, you might have to weigh that in as well. So,
well, and then there's also benefits as well.
Right.
So, offering insurance, 401k matches, things like that. I know maybe it's not a big topic at this point, but eventually in your life it will be very important.
Right. So if anybody's interested and has further questions on that, we do have our CARP 411 class that we teach all of that in. So you may be interested in taking that on your roster, on your when you register for classes next week. So just
Did
throwing
you-
that out there.
Hey, Jordan, do you find of people, some companies that are doing hybrid, 2 days a week or whatever the hybrid might be, that most companies usually have a core hours or core days that they want the people to be adhere to?
Absolutely, absolutely. So typically, especially around here, I would say that a lot of government companies specifically are always going to be that 9 to 5 are the core hours. And then you'll have that flexibility. So even if you're working remote, you really need to be available for 9 to 5 meetings, but you may have flex hours where you can actually start work at 8 and end at 4 unless there's a meeting scheduled. So there's always that flexibility at most companies where as you grow in the company, or even after your 90 days of first starting out in training, they may say, hey, now that everything's working out, just so you know, we do have this flexibility that we kind of didn't make you aware of at first, where you can actually start an hour early and end an hour early, or take a shorter lunch if that's what makes you happy and that's what you want.
Okay, any other final questions from anybody?
I actually did have one I just wanted to quickly touch on. We did also get a question on the private sector versus government contracting versus federal contracting. So just a quick little thing on it. Again, we're going back to that, do your research. Make sure that you understand that there are pros and cons of both. Working for private, working for the government, governments give the pension, they usually stay with you longer. If you're working directly for the federal government, it is typically a lower pay. So keep that in mind, but you have more growth opportunities a lot of times in federal. Working in government contracting could mean that you're working on a government contract. It could mean that you're working on a contracting company that you work for 3 years on this contract, and then your job's over. Or it could mean that you actually work for the company on a contract, but there's no end date. So make sure you're doing your research as you're looking at the position. It usually tells you all of that information. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that. It's a big field, so it's almost its own presentation. So do your research, look into it. And if you have more questions on it, I think Teresa has all of my info. I'd be more than happy to answer some specific questions that came up regarding it.
Perfect. And thank you so much again, Jordan and Katie. Great presentation,
Thank
and
you so much.
really great questions from the students. Thank you all. I think, really wonderful. And we had such a fantastic turnout with great questions, and just what a great time. So thank you both so much for such great information, reiterating everything that we do tell. So appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
On behalf of KWAC, I want to thank Jordan and Katie for their extensive knowledge presentation that they've given everybody here. And as Teresa said, it was a large group. I also want to emphasize the fact that this was our second session out of 6 that we're going to be having. We're having 2 more sessions tomorrow. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock, we're having careers in government contracting in Washington, D.C. and beyond. And at 6:15 tomorrow, we're having Making It Happen, Graduate or Law School While Working Full-Time, the story of work-life balance. And then on Thursday night, actually afternoon, Thursday at 5 o'clock, we're having healthcare career opportunities in the greater Washington, D.C. area. And that's followed by our last one at 6:15 on Thursday, which is how recent federal legislation to rebuild our infrastructure and meet the competitive challenge from China will create millions of good jobs in America. So everybody, if you're interested in any of those, please register, and look forward to seeing those people, more people on the next 4 sessions. With that, I want to thank staff of King's and again, Jordan and Katie for their terrific presentation. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you all very much. Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Great to
Thank
see
you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Great to see you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.